Let me, should have it.
Can you, well, we've got to wait the 30 seconds for people to get it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start talking again, and then I'll start again if I have to. All right.
Can't hear Alex either.
Yeah, it'll catch up in a second here. So, all right, I'll start again. Welcome to tonight's episode of the Astro-Imaging channel. Great. Okay, I'm Molly. Thanks for sticking with us through a little tech glitch. That's the glory of being live. Sometimes we get these little glitches, and but it's we usually overcome them and get to press on with the show. I was saying before, found out that we couldn't hear us, that I'm really glad for everybody who comes here live and chit chats in the comments, ask questions of the speaker. That's the really great thing about this show being live, is that you get to actually communicate through us with the speaker to ask your questions and find out even more information than just watching it after. I know a lot of folks watch it after, and that's good too. But super great for everybody who can be here live. So originally tonight, we were going to have Dustin Brimberry, who was going to talk about Nina, but unfortunately he got sick. So we're going to reschedule him for a future date. So instead, our own Alex McConaughey is going to talk about how to get started in astrophotography for complete newbies, people who are new to the hobby, people who are looking to get into astrophotography. This is the talk for you. And his talks are always great and filled with lots of really comprehensive details. So this should be a good one. And so next week, we also have with us tonight Jonathan Hill, who's going to be talking about advanced solar eclipse photography. Jonathan, can you give us a brief rundown of what you're going to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody, I'm excited to be on next week. Like Molly said, I'm going to be talking about solar eclipse photography, specifically some advanced processing techniques that you really won't find anywhere else online other than in scientific papers. It's something I've been working on for several years now, and I'm excited to share some of those details with everybody so they can hopefully apply the same things to y'all's images.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to that. And I think all the folks in the room here are too. Let's see, coming up after that. So we are off on, where's my calendar? Yeah, I'm not going to share my screen. Our calendar's on our website, theastroimagingchannel.org. And the following Sunday, the 9th, we're off for the Super Bowl. And so, you know, it's a national American holiday, Super Bowl Sunday. So we'll be back the following week, the 16th, with Rolf Olsen, who's going to talk about this incredible Centaurus A 10-year long-ish image, as it were, of Centaurus A, this very deep field. So that'll be really interesting to hear about as well. Okay. We have a lot of blank spots in our calendar coming up, if you go take a look at that. And that's because we rely on folks out there in the wild, like y'all, to come on the show and give a presentation on a topic that's important and interesting to you. And we cover a wide variety of astrophotography topics, as you know. And if you go back and say, oh, this topic's already been covered, I can't cover that, that's totally not true, because even if we've covered it recently, everybody has a different perspective and a different piece of knowledge to bring to the table. And a lot of our older stuff actually needs to be updated. There's processes that have gotten a lot of new ways to do them in PixInsight, for instance. There's new hardware on the market that solves problems that we used to have. So a lot of our older stuff could use an update. So if you come across the show and you're like, yeah, that's we don't really do it that way anymore, we'd love to have you come on and talk about the new way to do things. So drop us a line on the contact us button on our website, theastroimagingchannel.org, and let us know if you want to give a talk, and we'll get you scheduled. And any of you, I believe, any of you can come on and give a presentation. We've had all kinds of people on here and all kinds of great presentations. So welcome, please come on. All right, I think with all of that being said, we'll go ahead and get rolling. Alex?
Hi, Molly. Thank you. That was a really cool introduction. I'm going to start sharing here. I hope. Select the tab to share my entire screen. That screen, share. And now I click down here. Go there. Is everything working?
Yeah, looks good.
I Hi, everybody. It's really good to be here tonight, filling in. This is a presentation I prepared for just this kind of emergency. I did have to say it wasn't quite finished, so I did a lot of stuff on it this morning. But I often get asked, like, what's it really take to be an astro-imager? And frankly, there's a lot of baloney out there about this. So I'm going to talk about that from my perspective. And I'll tell you, it is my perspective. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. But let's first remember that the term astro-imaging can be applied to many types of images. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about only one kind of astro-imaging, that of deep space objects. We'll talk about pictures taken of distant galaxies, gaseous glows, starry collections in our own Milky Way galaxies, and not of the other kind of astro-imaging pictures that you could have. Our overall presentation will take a certain approach. It's not the only way to take images, but we will cover many things a person new to deep space imaging needs to know. We're going to omit a lot, and we're going to exaggerate stuff. We'll be moving quickly, and there will be at times information on the slide that I do not talk about. If I do not talk about a particular brand or book title, you can check out the slide and Google it yourself. There's just not enough time to tell you everything. I should also tell you that I will not recommend a specific product to you. There are a couple I will recommend, but that's because I don't actually study this stuff. I can know what kind of stuff you want to see in the product, but I can't tell you which of the products best meets that situation. Now, just to tell you what's happening in the next hour, you should know that this is definitely a show for those who are not yet deeply into it, or for those who are into it, but finding the going a little slow. And as I've already said, it's about deep space imaging. Nothing I say should be taken as doctrine or that it is the only way to do things. There are no hard and fast rules about how to do most of the things in astroimaging. We must judge what we need and how much we can afford according to our own upbringings and life experiences and financial means. I was raised in a big family that was always fed and housed and taken care of, but because I had parents who lived through the Depression, we never spent any money. What money there was always put away for a rainy day. Occasionally I got something new, but most of what I wore had been worn before by somebody else. To this day, I get teased about my miserliness from my older equipment, my general approach to spending. My backyard observatory has a Celestron G11 mount. Yes, a Celestron G11, not a Losmandy. It's that old. From the mid-90s when Celestron was getting its mounts from that upstart Losmandy. I had bought it used and had been using it for more than 20 years. I hang around astroimagers and read on cloudy nights and know people who replace their 2-year-old premium mounts just because Software Bisque has introduced a new Paramount. I once heard a person say, it's only about 12,000 bucks. I personally don't see how only can ever describe 12,000 bucks. But I've also learned that money, properly applied to imaging equipment, may have a big value. The value of spending more money on equipment is that you can possibly get better results. You see, I also have a desert observatory where I do have a premium Astrophysics 1200 mount. I never have to think about its tracking or how much weight I can put on it. I can take 5-minute exposures pretty much without guiding. Notice, though, that it is a 1200. That's an outdated mount that George at AP support always suggests that I update with the new encoders and software. But I just don't see the value of adding that equipment and at its expense. That guy who can use the phrase only 12,000 would consider an upgrade a necessity and not even think twice about it. We must judge what we need by our own standards. Money and the upgraded performance you can buy with it can give you better use of your time, better quality images faster. It can eliminate frustration and reward your efforts better. But sometimes the amount of money it takes just does not relieve all that much frustration. It doesn't save you all that much time or improve the results that much. So you are better off spending it someplace else. On the other hand, the lack of money can stop you from even beginning your astroimaging adventure. But if you are willing to put in with a few frustrations and not quite reach the level of performance you want, you can get going in astroimaging with relatively little financial bite. We each have to make our own decisions on all of that. And just know that I am coming from being raised by Depression era survivors, and much of my advice will be along the line of getting value for your money and getting started. Okay, having said all that, I'm going to do something that may discourage some of you, challenge some of you, relieve nobody. But there is no use hanging around for the hour I'll be rambling on if you're not willing to accept the ultimate challenge in astroimaging. It could cost you a minimum of a couple of $1,000s. And you might expect something like $5,000 before you have a rig that will really produce what you want. And that is for beginning imaging. Advanced imaging can easily be twice that for the mount alone. We'll look at these recommendations and numbers in the course of the presentation, but you also realize as we go along that you probably already have spent much of this money. So turning it into a productive astro-imaging rig will not cost you that whole $5,000. But if you are starting from scratch, you have no friends to borrow from and want the minimum usable quality, and you purchased it all new, this is about what it would cost you in money to become an astro-imager. If you could put $1 on the value of time and patience, wow, there would be a lot more than 5,000. Finally, I encourage everybody to share their experience in the comments section and share your disagreement with what I'm preaching from my pulpit. I mean, be nice to me, but feel free to point out where I am leading this flock astray or saying anything that you disagree with, or if you have a story to the contrary, or a story in support of. Earlier, I said that there were different kinds of astroimaging, but that we were going to talk about deep space. I've divided astroimaging into 5 types. There are some other subcategories, but they generally fit one of the others, major ones. Nightscapes are wide field pictures of the Milky Way or other parts of the sky, and sometimes can be combined with landscapes. If you're interested in this kind of work, see the TAIC show on the subject, such as Cheryl Wilcox's TAI show from, I think it was January 6th. Electronic Assisted Astronomy, EAA, is using a camera to capture what the eye would normally see at an eyepiece, projecting it live to a monitor, and watching in more detail and in color that the eye cannot see alone. There is a lot more to it than that, and it is quite popular for outreaches where crowds of people can see what the telescope is seeing. And as you can see, we've also done a show on that. Planetary, lunar, solar imaging, they make pictures of solar system objects. Now, these objects generally have plentiful light, so they're often captured in videos whose separate frames are processed to bring out the most important details. Alan Friedman did a great job on this last week in TAIC with the sun. Scientific imaging, now that captures images of various objects to precisely measure their positions, brightnesses, or colors. The filters, telescopes, and software are specialized to discover information important to astronomers pursuing the motions and nature of the heavenly bodies. Most of the other astro-imagers are gathering pretty pictures. That's us. Scientific imagers want to make nice, clean graphs and tables. A few years ago, Rod Pommier explained on the Astro-Imaging channel how he used amateur equipment to replicate the measurement of distance to M31 using scientific astroimaging. And finally, there is the subject of this presentation, deep space. As I said earlier, it is capturing galaxies and objects in the Milky Way. We like to look at the glowing gas clouds, the clusters of stars, the Messier objects, and all that. We want pretty pictures. Why do we need to distinguish among all these types of astroimaging? Well, each subcategory requires a different set of equipment, software, techniques. EAA and planetary, lunar, and solar tend to use video cameras, taking hundreds or even thousands of frames. They can get by with decent mounts that generally track the stars, even though they may not be perfect like those of us in deep space imaging need. While EAA can be used at different focal lengths, both it, planetary, solar, and lunar generally use longer focal lengths. Deep space, however, uses cooled astro cameras to take long-timed exposures. The focal length of the telescope depends somewhat on the target. Most importantly, the mount must be extremely well behaved, following the stars precisely, and perhaps aided by a guide camera that corrects any imperfections in the mount. In short, different types of astro-imaging take different equipment. This different equipment is used in different ways, of course. A session of EAA for any given object may simply require that session of EAA may simply require that you have the object pointed there and you can see what's developing on the monitor. You can even do it in daylight if you're doing it in a daytime object like the sun, or in a well-lit tent with the telescope outside in the dark, showing the result on a big screen high-def television. The results are available in near real time. A target may be imaged in as little as 15 minutes with a crowd of people watching it happen. Nightscapes, however, are often taken on a hike to a particularly beautiful part of the Earth with a good DSLR and a wide-field camera lens, not a telescope. Tracking is not required. Most of the controls you need for acquisition are available on your DSLR or mirrorless camera. An image can be a single image taken in 15 seconds. Deep sky targets, however, are generally invisible to the naked eye because they are so dim and far away. They must be captured over hours at a time, under very dark skies. Our equipment must be carefully aimed and track the stars perfectly. The camera should be artificially cooled to reduce noise. A session can last most of the night, and one target will contain dozens to hundreds of exposures, each a minute to 5 minutes long. Some kind of computer to capture the images is pretty much a necessity. Again, all these different types bring out the data in different ways. In theory, there are similarities in all the processing. Basically, individual frames must generally be calibrated, registered so that the stars and other details align, and then stacked, which throws out the bad parts of the image caused by defects in the cameras and some random glitches. Then colors are emphasized or de-emphasized as needed, things are sharpened, noise is removed, and the image is finally displayed. But depending on how the image was captured, the processes may be substantially different. EAA will align each shot as it comes from the camera, sometimes in a video format, building a brighter and crisper image with each new downloaded frame. The processing will be, in the first place, in real time and done by adjusting sliders on the software to perform statistical tricks on the data to make it prettier with each new frame. You can save that image and later go back and process it further if you like, but the goal is to capture and display in real time. Deep Sky takes its own sweet time to do all these steps at home afterwards. It's not in a hurry at all, and used a pretty much different set of software. So, can you use one type of equipment from one type of astronomy in other deep space astroimaging? Yeah, but when you do, you may have to do a lot more work or be limited in your imaging quality. Can you drive your high school sweetie to the prom in a 10-ton truck? Of course you can. You'll get there, probably. You may have issues with parking, with securing a license, with the cost of gas, with what your sweetie thinks about it. Assuming they still have proms. I don't really know. I left high school in 1999. So here, Juggernaut from Cloudy Nights shows off his pretty good image from a Dobsonian telescope, something made specifically for visual observing and not for astroimaging. So he can do it. But the main point is that over time, the techniques and equipment of EAA as opposed to deep space or skyscape versus scientific imaging and so forth have changed so much that specialization has required different equipment and techniques. Just let it be known that you can use less than ideal equipment no matter what type of astroimage you are taking. So use what you can, but in the long run, think about getting the right stuff for the type of imaging that you will be doing. This requires that you choose one of the 5 types of imaging to make you happy. And for this presentation, we've chosen deep space. There's no such thing as a perfect scope, mount, camera, sensor, or any piece of equipment for every type of astrophotography. But you should get started with something. Start with what you have and get moving. Having said, go with what you got. Remember, this presentation is about doing it the right way if you are starting from relatively nothing. It is not about adapting other types of equipment and techniques to doing deep space imaging. What are the demands of deep space imaging that drive the equipment choices? Deep space imaging demands that you gather a lot of light from a dim object. Maybe a half dozen deep space targets are visible to the naked eye in the dark skies. Most nebula, for instance, require a telescope and exposure of more than a few seconds just to see. By the time the photons arrive at our eyes or the sensor of the camera, they are a bit jumbled up by the atmosphere and other things. Then there's some electronic noise. The sensor itself is imperfect in counting them. The photons are disturbed by the unsteadiness in the atmosphere over the last 60 to 100 miles of their journey. Electronic noise in our cameras and all around us in our environment are also carried by photons and could skew the count of photons of light coming from the distant target. One way to overcome these issues is by cooling the camera. Another way is by correcting the tracking. But the main tool we have to fight all these random variations is statistics. We are going to average out the weird photons and get a number from the average photons instead. And to get a good solid number after averaging, we need a big sample size. In the case of astro-imaging, that means a lot of time to collect the exposure. Our targets are not holding still. In the course of the day, the Earth turns one whole rotation. To our eyes, the targets seem to move pretty evenly across the sky, but that's not exactly true because the atmosphere itself acts as a large lens, and the stars travel at a slightly different rate depending on where they are in the sky. This aberration becomes very obvious near the horizon. If the stars are moving at a smooth speed across the heavens, we need equipment that can follow these targets very smoothly. The gears must be polished smooth and perfectly circular. The motors must be very constant as they push. The parts must fit together so well that there's no slop or slippage. The camera and telescope must be balanced so that the simple electric motor can keep things moving smoothly and keep the telescope pointed precisely at the target all night long. But there are other things that get in the way of perfection. You can follow a star if the center of your mount's motion is precisely the same as the Earth's pole. But if it is not, your image will drift up or down. In extreme cases, the pinpoints of stars become streaks. If your mount is not balanced, pushing weight up one side may be slower than the stars move, while the mount may be pulling harder down on the other side and going faster than the stars if it's unbalanced. The mount will respond to corrections one way faster than the other, and as the mount moves, the effect of the imbalance will shift and cannot be properly controlled. If your motor runs low on power, it might move slower. How can it keep a constant speed if it does not have the proper and consistent power? If you have too much weight on the mount, not only may you have motor speed problems, but your tripod legs and other fittings and supports may start to bend. I could go on about tripods sinking into soft ground, about winds, about one of your connections in the imaging train or a focuser slipping, about alligators whacking their tails against a tripod leg, or more likely you, the budding noob astro-imager, bumping your mount as it sat there. A movement of just a few seconds of arc can show up as a soft image and a bit more out of focus, or even with trailed stars. Now, all this is not to scare you. It's to tell you that you might need a guider. Few machines are made to such critical tolerances and can cope with all the vicissitudes of a night of imaging on the sub-arcs minute level. So for astronomical purposes, we have invented a system called guiding, which uses another camera and computer to take pictures while our main camera is doing its own work. This other system takes a picture, identifies the star, and determines its position. Then it takes another picture of the same star. If the star is in the same place on the screen, the mount is doing its job and the guiding system does nothing. If the star is not in the same place, something has hiccuped. So the guiding system gooses the mount up, down, left, or right, such that the star is moved back to the original position. This means that the telescope is pointed back to where it was in the first place. And then the guiding system does it all over again, every few seconds for the length of the main camera exposure. The result overall corrects the errors of the scope's movement. Now, returning for a second to the types of astroimaging. The demands of long exposure and all that it carries with us is what really distinguishes the equipment and techniques that separate deep space imager from the other types of astroimagers. Deep space, generally speaking, and scientific imaging to a limited degree, put the greatest demand on long exposures, and long exposures put the greatest amount on your equipment, particularly your mount and your guiding system. If you have brought equipment for nightscapes, EAA, planetary, lunar, or solar, your equipment might not be able to take the long exposures you need for deep space. That is why the most critical element of deep space imaging is a good mount. Spend your time and money getting a good mount first. Look for the following. It should be an equatorial mount. That is, the main movement is following the stars from east to west. It does this by the center of its rotation being parallel to the center of the Earth's rotation. If it were a wheel, its axle would point perfectly north-south. This is called the right ascension axis. Its rim would run from east to west as it moves. It would have a secondary ability to move the tube attached to the north or south along what it's called its declination axis. Together, these two motions allow you to point to and follow any star above the horizon. Once you pointed the scope, the only movement necessary through the night is on the right ascension, unless some gremlin, and there are many gremlins, requires a slight adjustment on the declination axis. Avoid scopes that move only in altitude, up and down, or azimuth, round and round. They add immensely to the difficulties of taking long exposure astro images. Excuse me. Many visual mounts are in fact altos. Perhaps the most popular mounts out there are Dobsonians. And while Dobbs and other visual mounts can be motorized to follow one star, they cannot follow a whole camera field of stars easily. Don't go there if you're buying deep space equipment. Secondly, get enough mount to carry whatever you plan to put on it. This counts the telescope and the camera, of course, but you will also have a guide camera, additional optics, maybe a small computer, and perhaps a few other things hanging around up there. And remember, there is no industry standard for mount capacity. Capacity is usually stated in weight, but the length and width of the tube may be just as important to consider. A long, lightweight refractor may be overloaded. It may overload the same mount that handles a short, heavier SCT quite easily. Generally speaking, you should look for a mount rated to hold about twice the amount of weight you will actually be putting up there. And always consider the mount's periodic error. Periodic error is pretty much all mounts have regular errors that prop up in certain locations on the rotating gears when those locations get to certain places in their matching gears. At these points, the mount moves faster or slower than at other times. Since they rely on the period of time it takes the gear wheels to go around, these errors are called periodic errors. Any mount you buy should have a listing specification for its periodic error, and any mount you buy should be correctable for its periodic error. This is a software correction that records the periodic error, and as the error is about to come up, the software gooses the drivetrain so that it moves temporarily faster or slower as it needs to correct the movement. In the first place, you want a very limited periodic error, which means well-machined gears and electronics, which means bigger bucks. But you also want to be able to correct those errors that remain by using additional software. I should point out that a new type of drive system has become very popular of late. It uses harmonic strain wave technology that allows one to carry a relatively heavy load on a rather lightweight portable mount. In a traditional mount, one small motor can smoothly push the weight around the RA axis. The small motor works because the weight of the scope is balanced by counterweights. In a strain wave mount, a much tougher motor can push that mount where it needs to go without the counterweights. As a result, the whole assembly can be much more portable. But there's a cost to this innovation. The error in the strain wave mount is higher and generally not quite as periodic and predictable as in a traditional system. Now, there are ways to minimize this problem, but it does add a lot to the complexity of the system. Many people just love their strain wave systems. Others are leery of their ability to track smoothly, especially at long focal length. I've not taken a stand on them. I don't have one. They certainly work and they're popular, but I'm not sure of their top end quite yet. They've got some time to be developed yet. Remember, the mount normally includes a tripod of some sort. You need a strong, stable tripod. Don't worry about portability quite yet for your rig. You only carry it around twice for each imaging session. You're a deep space imager and need stability more than portability. One final thing before we leave mounts in general. You need a direct connection between the computer and your mount. The SD4 guider connector is nice, but the usual serial, it could be a USB connection, does the same thing, plus allows go-to targets, centering with plate solving, periodic error connection, and other functions that you will need in your mount in the long run. Now, I don't know if I can get this managed right. I don't know how we're doing in the other questions over there. How are we doing, guys?
I haven't seen any questions yet.
Okay, let's leave the mounts then. The mount is the most important decision, so get a good one. Now to the telescope. There are no end to how to configure the optics to take advantage of the images. Each configure has its strengths and limitations. I'm not going to comment on all the parameters that could affect your choice, but I am going to recommend that if you are just setting out, get a refractor with about 450 to 700 millimeter focal length, with at least 70 millimeters of aperture. Quite often they're 80 and a little bit more even, with a good focuser, and apochromatic if you could at all afford it. A refractor because it's solid and smaller and easier to mount. Focal length relates to how big your targets will appear. You need more focal length for small targets, but as a beginner, most of your targets are larger targets. Besides, long focal length telescopes are much more difficult to use. The 70 millimeter aperture relates to how much light it will gather for each exposure. The good, strong focuser, capable of holding a camera, relates to the stability of the rig and ease of focus. If you can afford it, make it apochromatic. This means that your stars will not have unnatural colors on their edges. Now, this does not mean that you cannot image with a Newt, Schmidt-Cassegrain, or an RC. Use them if that's what you have. But each of these alternates carry with them a much longer focal length and more difficulties mounting and managing. And for a beginner, these kinds of things should be avoided. Next thing you need is a camera. A DSLR or mirrorless camera uses essentially the same sensor as a dedicated astro camera. And many of us already have one of those sitting around the house that can be put to work immediately in Astro-Imaging. This could save or put off an expensive investment when you're just getting started. But cool sensors that you will find in dedicated astro cameras have a big advantage in Astro-Imaging because the cooling greatly reduces the noise and allows for longer exposures. So you'll want to move to a dedicated astro camera with its cooling as soon as you can reasonably afford it. But in the meantime, if you have a DSLR or mirrorless, strap it on, get to work. Should it be one-shot color or monochrome? Well, all sensors gather light in blacks, grays, and white. They get their color information by recording their data through colored filters. In a one-shot color arrangement, the colored filters are an array of red, green, and blue altogether. It's permanently affixed to the front of the sensor, allowing each individual pixel to see only one color or another. By interpreting the amount of these three colors in comparison with the colors from the neighboring pixels, the processing can reveal the true color of the target. In traditional monochrome, there are 3 or 4 separate filters that lets in red light only, or green light only, or blue only, or what we call luminance, which is the brightness of all or any color. The imager then mixes the data from these subframes to get the real colors. This method requires additional equipment like this filter wheel down here in the middle bottom and filters in the processing step, but it can produce better images with experience. One-shot colors are easier to work with, and the beginner can produce quality images right from the get-go with relative ease. Therefore, I would suggest the beginner starts off with a cooled one-shot color operation. One more thing about OSC. Certain imaging like comets or traveling imaging is much simpler with an OSC camera than with a monochrome with filters camera. So that one-shot camera will always have a use even after you have moved up to the higher overall quality of LRGB and narrowband imaging. Now, you may have heard the term CCD and CMOS and wonder how it affects you as a beginner. It doesn't, at least not anymore. But if you are buying something new or used, then you'll want a CMOS. The differences are technical and based on their electronics, not how they are used and what they produce. But practically speaking, CMOS cameras are probably newer, have less noise. CCD, on the other hand, has older but still quite usable technology. Sensor size is your next choice. Sensor comes various sizes, and you want the largest sensor you can afford. Be aware, though, that there is a big jump in price between a quite usable APS-C and the full frame. I would really not want to be using much less than an APS size sensor. Yes, they are more expensive than the others, but they give you a wider field than the smaller chips. Okay, we need to backtrack a little. I've so far made three fairly solid recommendations. 1, get the best mount you can afford, and that will always be number 1. 2, the 2 other recommendations kind of work together. I set a scope in the 450 to 700 millimeter focal length and a sensor with at least an APS-C or bigger. These work together because focal length and sensor size determines the field of view, how much your telescope will see. And you will want the field of view to match your targets. This is space. Sorry for the quality of the image, but it gets the idea of across. This is space as your color camera would see it in a telescope with a 540 millimeter focal length. If it were a 1200 millimeter telescope, you would see less of it, but it would look bigger. If you had a full frame sensor, you would capture this large area in green. If you had an APS-C size sensor, you would capture only the smaller area in green. You will notice that what you have captured is identical to what the larger sensor captured, but the smaller sensor captured only the central part of it, cutting off some of what could be captured by the full frame sensor. Now, when you displayed that smaller area on your computer, you would see it is still a very nice picture, and the details look a little larger. It's as if you've gotten more magnification, but you just enlarged the smaller picture, cropping out many of the things that you saw in the full frame picture. You could have simply cropped and resized the larger frame. Now, I've admitted a lot in this explanation, including a discussion of pixel size. But my main point is that with a 450 to 700 millimeter scope and an APS-C or larger sensor, you will have a setup that can capture many of the objects you will be most interested in. We touched on auto-guiding a while back, and it's necessary at some point to make up for the inadequacies of mount speed and other gremlins. You add a second camera that takes a picture of where the telescope is pointing, identifies the star locations in the image, and then takes another image. If the stars have shifted positions, the computer running the show tweaks the position of the mount to return its aim to the original point, and then it does it again and again and again for the length of the exposure. To do this, you need a camera looking at the sky connected to a computer and a connection from the computer back to the mount. The cameras can range from the low $100 range. The telescope it is connected to can be had very cheaply. A simple low-quality refractor will do. Oh, and you need solid mechanical connections between the guide cameras and the main camera. You could also use an off-axis guider, which gets its information from the side of the main telescope's telescope image. But some people complain that these are harder to use and harder to set up. I don't find them so, and I prefer the off-axis guider. But most beginners are happy with a separate ride-along guide scope. You can do some limited astroimaging without a computer if you use a DSLR and do not guide. Excuse me, but this is a presentation about how a beginner can do imaging well, and that will take a computer to run the session and store the results. It does not take much of a computer to get this stuff done. A simple Windows 10 laptop, beaten and scratched up, will do you fine. Get one with at least 4 USBs, with one of them being USB 3 if you can, and you should be good to go. Many people have found happiness with a mini computer that can cost $129, again, capable of running Windows. How simple can this computer be? Well, I've not researched the whole history of dedicated astrocomputers, but by 2018 or so, some users were writing code for the Raspberry Pis that could handle the complete job of running an astroimaging session. Astroberry and Stellarmate were early on, and for some years now, ZWO has offered various generations of its ASI Air. These devices, which I'm calling dedicated computers, can be stuck on the side of an imager's tripod, not much bigger than a couple of decks of cards. Or they could be stuck on the side of a telescope. They run off simple 12-volt batteries and handle all the power and communication devices one needs for astroimaging. These dedicated computers and the mini computers I spoke of earlier can be managed with phones and tablets. Beware, though, that they have limitations. The ASI generally gets confined to ZWO products. Great if you want to stay in that family. A killer if your camera is not covered. Killed again if the equipment that you have changes and you want to change something to something outside of ZWO. The variety of the software you can load and use, like free Nina, is more powerful than the software in these dedicated computers. The dedicateds do get the job done, and they're very popular, but you may eventually hit a wall with them, and they cost much more than you need to pay for. My recommendation for the beginner is that old laptop. It's free because you already have it, or your cousin does, or somebody's got an old laptop sitting around. They're available for used in the $100 range. My next choice would be a mini computer with a free software like Nina, but there are tons of users on these dedicated computers and they just love them. So finally, there will be power supplies, batteries, filters, and other things that you will find necessary or convenient to add on. These things can vary in price a bit, but they're mostly rather inexpensive, and there's a good chance you already own them. To this typical setup, I might add a ground cover, a chair, and maybe a little beer cooler. There are two types of software, we're moving on to software now, that you'll need for your rig. Acquisition software conducts your session. You pick the target, the amount of frames you want, the exposure time of those subframes, and the acquisition takes care of programming and collecting all of those frames. When you get good and quit fussing, you let the software do it all by itself while you sleep. For this task, I recommend Sequence Generator Pro, which is a beautiful and powerful program. Or Nina also is a very powerful program. And since SGP costs about $150 to start and $60 to renew every year, and Nina is free forever, I'm going to go with Nina on my recommendations here. The other software you will find necessary is something to process all the images. Now, this is not a presentation about processing, and if you're asking, I am recommending you learn PixInsight as soon as you can. It is by far the most powerful astroimaging software. It has a reputation for being a bit obtuse. Yeah, so do I. But if you start off slowly and ignore most of it and just step through the simple things you really need, you can master it fairly easily. It costs a pretty penny, a little more than 300 euros as a one-time purchase with no later subscriptions. But you get the most powerful program you can get. There are add-ons, incidentally, which cost even more. Acknowledging 300 euros sounds like a lot. Realize it is probably the least expensive purchase you will need to get established in astroimaging. And it is worth it. You will be there eventually. Just go there. But there are some very powerful alternatives. I don't have experience with them, so I'll not make the recommendations, but other people have. A while back, Ron Haddon did his show on the Astro-Imaging channel about processing with free and low-cost software. It would be a good thing to look at. Now, getting down to business. This is my one-person opinion about what you should have to start, or at least where you should be trying to get to when you are going to be a really good beginning deep space astroimager. A mount that's rated to hold 30 or 40 pounds with low or correctable error. A nice 450 to 700 millimeter focal length, 70 millimeter or more aperture, achromatic refractor. An APS-C or larger sensor and a cooled camera. A guiding system, a computer, Nina, and PixInsight or other processing software, and lots of support stuff to connect things and make you comfortable. You've seen this before, so there's no surprises. You've already heard me say if you're willing to put up with a little compromise, you already have a good substitute for some of these things. If your scope has just too much focal length, for instance, you have one of those ubiquitous 8-inch split Cassegrains, you just have to be a little more careful about mounting, aiming, and guiding it. And you will limit what targets you can reasonably get. But people have been getting great images with them for years. You can use them. If you cannot afford a guider yet, you just have to be a lot better at polar aligning, taking shorter exposures, use your periodic error correction in your mount more carefully, and that kind of thing. If you cannot afford PixInsight, or don't choose to, you can use one of the other free or low-cost alternatives. You just may not have the power and processing you want, but you may not be able to use it yet either. Now for some old geezer recommendations. Okay, this is just what I would like to tell somebody coming along right now. More expensive equipment can potentially get better results. More importantly, it does things more easily. Less expensive equipment, however, also works well. As has been said in response to the ancient question, Nikon versus Canon. It is not the camera, it is the person behind the camera that gets the picture. I think Ansel Adams said that. I use it later in this presentation. It is true that many of these items equipment, regardless of whose name is on the side of the piece of kit, comes from the same factories. But that does not mean they are the same. One company may have a different standard for what they will accept. And just because an item meets a standard does not mean that the next item, same exact specifications and everything coming down the line, does not mean that it has better performance or worse. They all meet the minimum standards. Some exceed those standards more than others. You could get a bad example of that particular item, but they're all packed in the same box and shipped across the ocean. However, if you're going premium and buy from Astrophysics or Software Bisques, it will be a very good copy of the item. If you buy from others, it may be or it may not be the best the company sells, even though it meets the company's published standard. The one thing you notice in premium equipment is that it just works. You don't have to think about it all that much, or it just disappears. It's not one of the things you think about when you're imaging. Everything in life is a compromise, such as astroimaging. You can save money, but there may well be a non-monetary price for that. And value does not increase with price. If you spend $1,000 on a mount, you will not be long-term happy. If you add an extra $1,000 to that, $2,000, it will make a whole world of difference. If you plan to spend $5,000 a mount and then add an extra $1,000 to that and pay $6,000, you probably won't be a world happier. Maybe just an asteroid worth of difference between $5,000 and $6,000 worth of metal. Of course, that asteroid may be important to you. The important thing is quit fussing it all and get something good to take pictures with. Unless you hang around in a cool group of buddies, everything in imaging has a cost. I know one person who borrows stuff all the time. Sometimes she gives it back. Rarely. Some people think you can just sell it to somebody else and just recover your costs. Think again. You cannot just try out equipment. There are 90-day trials on some software, and sometimes you can make arrangements to return and upgrade stuff. But in general, if you buy something to try it out, it will cost you whatever you spend to buy it and have it shipped to you, minus whatever you can sell it for later and ship it back to them after you've run your experiment. So make your decisions wisely. Don't do a bunch of experimenting. Don't just be collecting stuff as you go and losing money on every experiment. Don't waste money along the line. Wait for a bit, using what you already have to fake it in the interim, but buy at least minimum quality and plan to keep it for a while. Much of the stuff you use in beginning astroimaging can be quite useful later on. Look, I hate to sound like an environmental ad, but we could learn from their philosophy. When you have finally gotten that large 152 millimeter apochromatic scope for $9,000, you will still find many uses for your 70 millimeter aperture, 450 millimeter focal length refractor. The beginner stuff can become the central part of your solar setup or your EAA main scope or a pop-up kit for outreach or camping trips that you don't want to take the big stuff, or you don't want to take stuff out of your observatory. I've said it repeatedly throughout this presentation. Use what you have. You can learn a lot and make great pictures with an older DSLR that you already have. That 8-year-old laptop can run an imaging session pretty much as well as a brand new one. The important thing is to get going. Will you see the difference? No. Your eyes are not good enough to see the difference between a shot you take with the equipment I have described compared to the stuff that you have been dreaming about. For the first 8 to 10 sessions of your astroimaging career, which may take a year to happen, you will be limited by your skills, not the equipment. You should not even pretend to fuss about the RMS of your guiding, or the size of your pixels, or the fact is, even after you've learned all the tricks of this hobby, the weather, light pollution, and things you have no control over whatsoever, not your equipment, will be the limiting factor in the images you make. If it is windy with bad seeing and mediocre transparency, your image will generally be not a whole lot better in a $25,000 rig than in a $5,000 rig. The equipment I have described here will make great pictures for you for years. More expensive or more modern equipment will make it easier to take the pictures and more repeatable with fewer glitches and surprises. But whether it'll be better imaging overall depends on how much you've grown in your own skills, not the equipment. Improvement will come through intelligent practice, not from upgrading equipment, at least for a while. To summarize the purchasing plan, budget and save. Use what you can. Use what you have already. Borrow when you can. Buy used. Sell stuff. Go to swap meets. Use Cloudy Nights and Astromart. I'd use it, except I've been banned. And do whatever you can to get it, but budget and save and be smart with your money. Getting help is really important. Getting together with others really helps. There's so much gobbledygook describing how to take deep space images that sometimes it helps to spend a few minutes with somebody who points to something, moves a few set screws, pushes a few keystrokes on the keyboard and says, yeah, all that means is blankety blank, 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 blank. There's an awful lot of stuff that just don't worry about it. Just take your pictures. Just seeing it in action really helps. And having buddies around to reflect on things really helps. Having a pal slap you upside of the head and say, no, that's dumb. That's screwy. Don't do it like that. do it like this. That kind of teaching can really be pretty good to get you. Make an effort to find the local club. It will probably have some imagers. Or go to these places. Go out with people who take pictures near you and visit with them. I am a very introverted person. I'm very introverted and don't get into conversations easily. But when I want to see how something is done, there is nothing quicker than watching somebody do it while asking them questions. We go to star parties and workshops. Adam Block's going to be at Nightfall next year. You want to come hear from Adam Block for, 4 or 5 hours and sit around in the campgrounds with him like we did with Molly last October? Yeah, these are real people. They'll come out and talk to you, visit with you. We've got in our club, we've got a group of people that meet once a month via Zoom, and we talk about about imaging, what problems we're having, what challenges we're facing, and so forth. There's also, of course, online tutorials. According to a recent Google search for YouTube videos about astroimaging, there were 2,200,000 such videos. You will notice that the first hit, at least for my search, was the Astro-Imaging channel, which you are watching right now. We've been bringing you presentations nearly every Sunday afternoon for more than 10 years. And you can look at them all by going to the website, clicking on the database, and using the find function to locate what you might need. Let's go look for Adam Block. You can't read that, of course, but honest, I can tell you that it says Adam in there someplace. And then you go on over and you click the link over on the left side, and the next thing you know, if this works properly, you actually get to the actual show and you get to watch whatever Adam had to say. So you got all sorts of information like that. You also got traditional books, print books. Two of my favorites are Warren Keller's explaining PixInsight and Charles Bracken trying to explain everything of astroimaging. Both these guys give very comprehensive views of their chosen topics. And sometimes it's easier to learn with books. Oh, and RTFM. You all know what RTFM means. It means read that fine manual. So many people ask questions without ever having looked at the manual. And some of the manuals actually explain their stuff they're supposed to explain. Okay, folks. That's it. My advice to those who want to become deep sky astroimagers. How are we doing on questions and stuff, guys?
We're good, Alex. Just a couple of comments, but no questions so far. But more than 50 people have been actively watching the channel.
Okay. Could you say that last part again?
Alex, we had over 50 people.
Oh, we had 50 people. Yeah, 53.
Despite the football games.
They don't have a video recorder of the game? Let's see, who had some comments? Anybody say that I was dumb?
Yeah, there were half a dozen, but we banned them.
Well, besides the people in the room. Besides the people in the room.
I was going to say most of them are in the room. No, it was excellent presentation. Alex.
Okay.
Really, excellent.
There were a couple of things I didn't put in there, like the smart telescopes. I'm not sure that they're astroimaging yet. But and the thing. What is going to be a long marathon and lots of incremental improvements. Amen, Mike. I got you there. Full of problems, challenges with Mike. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, we were encouraging people to ask questions, and so was a couple other people in the chat. But guess we'll just have to ask them in the comments afterwards that we always forget to go read.
Yep.
Now's the time, folks.
Okay. That's it. Thank you, everybody.
You want to stop sharing your screen, Alex?
Oh, yeah. Stop presenting.
All right. Well, thanks so much for everybody who came to watch us live tonight. And please come back in future weeks for all the awesome talks that we have. On our website, the astroimagingchannel.org, there's also a link for the program database. And that is a spreadsheet that you can download and keep and it gets updated on a regular basis with our entire program history, and it's searchable. And so it includes the name of the video, the speaker, the date, and the description. So you can search through it if you're looking for something in particular, and go find it on that spreadsheet, which could be a little easier than trying to search it on YouTube if you're looking for something specific. So you can check that out on our program database.
Yeah, and that was illustrated in one of the slides we went through.
Molly, are we still doing shorts? We have shorts up there. Right?
Yeah, I haven't had time to do those, and yeah, so we do have on our YouTube channel as well what are called TAIC shorts, where we've extracted parts of videos that kind of contain a unit of information on how to do something specific, and that way you can go refer to that yourself easily, and it's also really easy to link on forums and stuff like that, where people are asking like, well, how do you do this? Like, hey, look, there's a video that describes that in like 10 minutes. So I have a long backlog of those that we need to make, but slowly but surely I'm hoping to start getting more of those out later this year. But yeah, be sure to check those out as well. Again, a plea for people to come on and speak. This is a by the community for the community kind of organization here, and everybody I think has some corner of their knowledge, and you don't have to be Adam Block to come on this show. Yes, we get Adam Block on the show sometimes, but you don't have to be Adam Block. We also get lots of just regular folks who come and talk about how they process a comet image, or about how to use an atmospheric dispersion corrector, or things like that. And everybody knows something.
You don't have to be that smart. They let me do presentations on the program.
Alex clearly knows what he's doing. He's smart. He just won't believe it. Okay. Any other closing comments, y'all? All right.
I think we're good.
Next week, we are off for the Super Bowl, this superb owl and commercial hour for some of us.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
In what?
It's 2 weeks. They have to make up some new rules, or maybe they don't. I don't know. Don't tell me.
Oh,
Tell me.
yeah, there's another week in there. Okay, next week we have Jonathan.
I haven't watched the game yet.
It's the week after we don't have the Super Bowl.
I was preparing a presentation.
We have Jonathan talking next week about advanced solar eclipse photography. Don't miss it. You can still process this year's solar eclipse images and make them better. So I probably will be doing that. Okay. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for coming. See y'all next week.
See you next week.
Good night.
Bye.